Good morning.
Good morning.
And happy Mother's Day. Welcome to Zion United Church of Christ, where we've been worshiping together since 1854 in downtown Mount Clemens, Michigan. Wherever you are in your journey with God, all are welcome to worship here with us at Zion. A few announcements before we get started here today. If you see the camera go out at all, don't worry about it. We'll try to get it back up again. Remember to like us on Facebook, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can see that coming up on the bottom of your screen right now. As many of you noticed, those of you who are in person, our organ is finally being repaired and refurbished. If you didn't notice all of the giant pipes on your way in and the ones taking up a few pews in the back row there, you'll notice for the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be using our piano instead of the organ. The Zion Council approved the improvements to make our organ sustainable for the next 50 or so years. I was going to say, have any of you seen a picture of an organ regulator? I think we can still put that up on the screen, even if the camera feed isn't working. Hey, there I am back again. This is an organ regulator right here. What it does is it keeps steady airflow for all the notes to be played continuously. My first thoughts were that it looks like a giant accordion, which makes sense since it is the constant flow of air that makes the music. We thought you might all enjoy a picture or two from the repair process. The company that is doing the repairs is called Fowler Herbert Organ Company, and the job will take up to 3 weeks to complete. So we will give you another update next week. The Zion Council at our last meeting decided to give $5,000 to McRest. This came out of our local benevolence and missions and outreach budget line item. Since then, our wonderful team of Kathys, Kathy Zakora, as well as our church council president, Kathy Tinkler, were able to present McRest with the check that will make it possible for them to buy a large wall unit for the kids' schoolwork, as well as to stock it full of supplies. They are extremely grateful for us at Zion, and this picture shows some of their gratitude. Today is our very special Mother's Day service, where we are honoring our grandmothers. Marge will speak more about this in just a minute here, but we'll have stories and music given as a tribute to our grandmothers, both past and present. We want to take a moment to thank Jennifer Kerner-Haberer for filling in as our church secretary on an interim basis, a couple of days a week. If any of you know anyone who would like to be our new church secretary, please either contact Kathy Tinkler, myself, or anybody else on Zion Council. Today is also coffee hour, where we'll be celebrating Mother's Day as well as Cinco de Mayo. We invite all of you to come back to the social hall after the service to enjoy tacos, nachos, cake, and ice cream. I can't think of a better combo myself. The flowers on the altar this morning are placed in loving memory of our dear friend, Nancy Bleal. Let us now enter into worship.
I love being a grandmother. And I know a lot of you do too, because I see your pictures on Facebook. Jane is always baking cookies with her grandsons and her little granddaughter. And this Friday, Barbara Vandekar drove all the way up to Petoskey just to see her little granddaughter Anna perform in a play. We go to their sporting events, we help them with their homework. Grandmas are wonderful. Mom may say no, but Grandma almost always says yes. They love us unconditionally, and they keep our secrets. Grandmas always make time for us. And sometimes when families have issues, they step in and raise us. My Grandma Schmidt was a good Catholic woman. And she raised 10 children, and she had 67 grandchildren. There were so many of us that when we got older, we gave ourselves each a number according to our birth order, and I'm number 28. But the amazing thing about those 67 grandchildren is every single one of them has a memory of spending time with Grandma. Not time in a group, but one-on-one time. And she has always been my inspiration for my 5 grandchildren. Today, we are honoring these very special women, our grandmothers, and thanks for the memories.
Benedictus fructus The Old Testament reading for today is written in Proverbs, chapter 31, beginning to read with the 10th verse. It's the wife of noble character. A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still night. She provides food for her family and portions for her female servants. She considers a field and buys it. Out of the earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her task. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. The epistle lesson for today is written in Acts chapter 9, beginning to read with the 36th verse. In Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. She was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa, so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, "Please come at once." Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, "Tabitha, get up." She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Barbara Ann Messel, a woman so amazing, the Beach Boys wrote a song about her. That's all we got. Thank you. Okay, but really, when we were asked to speak about our grandmother today, I just kept thinking, you mean Babs? For us, we learned to grow up calling her Grandma Babs. Now, we didn't start that name, but we sure have perpetuated it. She loves it. I think she was an even bigger fan when we eventually just shortened it to the moniker Babs. But think of it this way, Grandma. Only iconic people go by monikers, and we think that our Babs is way better than Prince, Madonna, and even Liberace. And we're here to tell you why. Babs played a huge role in our childhood, as it took a village to help raise us, especially this Energizer bunny over here. On weekends when we'd stay over, she'd even clap at our incredibly amateur concerts we'd put on and our dance performances that we worked all day in. And they were pretty terrible and cheesy. That's because our grandmother is kind. Their house was always the epicenter for our family gatherings with all of us kids. She'd clean up our scrapes, break up our arguments, make our dinner, and then scoop ice cream for all of us, the best part. There's still never a shortage of ice cream at Babs's house. However, all the chaos of 5 energetic, and sugar-crazy grandchildren caused a ruckus never seemed to faze her. That's because our grandmother grew up on a farm during the Depression and the war, so our grandmother's a badass. Now, as we got older, Babs was still just as present in our lives. She pedaled for the entire 2 hours on the Mount Clemens Pedal Pub for her 88th birthday in 2017. She wasn't afraid to learn the dance, the wobble, and the Cupid Shuffle for our weddings in 2018. And she plays along to Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and laughs hysterically at Impractical Jokers at our Wednesday night dinners. At 91, she learned how to use a tablet and subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch the services. That's because our grandmother is fun. We call her multiple times a week to check in and fill her in on our crazy weeks, and she's always so easy to talk to and so willing to listen to us. Seriously, I called her once and complained about work for 20 minutes, and later in the call she went, "Oh, it was so nice catching up, you just made my day." People flew out from as far as Idaho for her 90th birthday surprise. Multiple other people here at church call her Grandma, and my friends, probably to her chagrin, also call her Babs. People always ask and care about her, and she always asks and cares about others. Because our grandmother is very loving and very lovable. Our last and most important point that we have heard multiple people bring up and agree with is that she has pretty great hair. Right? Thank you to our grandmother for being kind, being a badass, fun, loving, and lovable. You do so much for others and anyone you come across, but what you've done for us is immeasurable, especially since we lost Mom. The last time we were up here reading on Mother's Day for our Mother's Day reflection was in 2018, where our mom was here to hear it. Coming up here to read a reflection on you and how amazing you are has shone light on an otherwise extremely dark and difficult day for both of us. Our mom was the absolute best, and it's not difficult to see where she got it from. Happy Mother's Day to Babs.
My mother was first a storyteller. She always was willing to sit down and tell stories, not read books to us, but tell us stories. And she told stories to the neighborhood kids as well. She taught me to roller skate, to ice skate, and to ride a bike. She took me to the library when I probably wasn't old enough to read. She took me to the art museum, which was right across the street from the main library in Detroit. And she took me to the Historical Museum and the Children's Museum, which were within a couple of blocks walking distance of the library and the art museum. She took us to Belle Isle, to the zoo, to the Detroit Zoo as well as the Belle Isle Zoo. She took us to all the places on Belle Isle that she had loved to go when she was a child. She was the president of the PTA. She had to work her way up to that, but she wound up president of the PTA. She was a Girl Scout leader. She took us camping. And she shared her outdoor skills with not only myself, but my scout friends. She took us on hikes around the neighborhood. She taught us crafts. Took me to the Masonic Temple to see operettas when I was much too young to appreciate them, but I enjoyed them and enjoyed singing along to Gilbert and Sullivan. When she took us camping, going back to the camping, she was the fire builder. The other mothers went along because they were part of the troop, but my mother was the fire builder and the outdoor cook, as well as the leader of hikes and the instructor on how to take care of things in a camping situation. When I was in my teens, she took me to swim practices and to swim meets. And she was the loudest person in the bleachers screaming at me as I swam to go faster and faster. When I was in high school, she went back to teaching as a substitute. In those days, the permanent certificate that was granted to teachers in the school system, many teachers in the school system was considered to be no longer sufficient, and all of those teachers were told that they had to take classes and get their degrees. And so while she was substituting, she was also going to college. She went to college about the same time I did. And it was an advantage because I was going to Wayne and it was about an hour on the bus, and if we waited until she was done with her evening classes, she drove myself and a couple of my friends home in the car, which was much more comfortable than the bus. Although you couldn't get any homework done in the car, but you could on the bus. She was placed in an art room one day. She went in and talked to the art teacher next door, and he told her what she could do to keep a class occupied. After that, they asked her if she'd come back the next day. She said, sure, I'll come back tomorrow. Sure, I'll come back tomorrow. And she came home and said to my sister and myself, what do I do tomorrow? So we taught her a couple of little cartoon trips. And she went on to fill that classroom as she was going to school at Wayne and earning her bachelor's degree in education and art ed. She said she never took fine arts classes, only art ed classes, because she couldn't compete with the kids from Gas Tech in the fine arts department. She was more than a student. She was a scholar. She loved being at school, and she loved her art classes. And she kept on taking classes even after Even after she had got her degree, she took local art classes. She swam every day when she had an opportunity, and she kept on drawing. When she found that she was losing her eyesight, she started drawing with magic markers because she couldn't work with paints any longer. And right up until the time she passed away, she always was doing things and encouraging me and my sister and our kids to keep on doing things and to enjoy ourselves and other people. And I think that she is responsible for my love of reading and my continued enjoyment of swimming.
Good morning. Happy Mother's Day to you all. Our gospel today is taken from John chapter 10, verse 22. John 10 and 22. It was the feast of the dedication at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly." Jesus answered them, "I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness to me. But you do not believe, because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish, and no one shall snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one." This is the gospel of the Lord.
My name is Alex Moore. I'm the son of Bill and Margie Moore, grandson of Dale and Joan Wilcox, and great-grandson of Walter and Marguerite Petschke. Today I'll be speaking about my great-grandma, Marguerite Petschke. She was born in Detroit, Michigan on December 7th, 1915. As a young girl, she moved with her family to the farm in Meade, Michigan. They grew their own food, and they had their own chickens. They used to go into town on a horse-drawn sleigh for supplies. They would put newspaper and fabric up on the windows to try to keep the cold out, but they would still wake up with frost on the blankets. She attended a one-room schoolhouse through 8th grade. She then chose to stay home and help work on the farm. All the kids would help with the farm chores. Everyone had their job. They would take a horse and buggy down to the Lutheran church, just down the street at 28 Mile and Omo Road. That's currently in New Haven. My great-grandfather, Walter, he was the son of Edward Petschke. Edward Petschke was born in Germany, and he was the pastor at the Lutheran Church at 28 Mile and Omo Road. Walter and Marguerite married in 1933. They had 3 children, and shortly thereafter, they moved to Mount Clemens, right over on Asbury Park. That's when Walter started the shop, Petschke Manufacturing. Funny story about the house over on Asbury Park. Before they bought it, some of you may know a gentleman named Ty Cobb. He actually had owned the house and used it as a speakeasy. For those of you who don't know, Ty Cobb was a famous baseball player who played for and ended up coaching the Detroit Tigers back in the 1920s. So shortly after they moved into their house on Asbury Park, Grandma and Grandpa Petschke would get visitors knocking on their door late at night, random strangers, trying to give a password to get in. And they had to tell them that this was no longer a speakeasy and that people lived here now. So after they arrived in Mount Clemens, they started seeking out a new church. A thriving German evangelical and Reformed church seemed to be the best place for them. That's when they found a home here at Zion in the early 1940s. Throughout the years, Grandma Petschke was involved in almost every women's group that we had, from Women's Fellowship to Fidelis, putting on the Rotary luncheons, much, much more. Walter originally ran the shop out of his garage on Asbury Park. He did that until they purchased the manufacturing building over on Hubbard Street here, which is still in business today. They built a home down on Riverside Drive, and shortly afterwards they built the cottage up at Higgins Lake. Now around this time, Walter was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which he ended up having for over 50 years. The plans for the cottage went from a 2-story home down to a ranch with lifts and gadgets for him to get around. My grandmother would end up taking care of him for the next 50 years as what we would now have designated a home caregiver. My great-grandpa Walter, he went into the nursing home in the early 1970s. We actually believe he went into the nursing home the same day that my grandmother, Joan Wilcox, passed away of cancer at the age of 46. Even when he went into the nursing home, Grandma Peschke would come up twice per day, every single day. And then she would spend Sunday afternoons there with him for over 20 years. She would cook and bring him lunch and dinner every day. His favorite was sauerbraten. Like clockwork, she was at his side until his death in 1993. As a kid, I remember going up to Higgins Lake with Grandma. She would pay us money, actually, to pick up pine cones and put them in bags and bring them down by the fire, a tradition which I have tried to keep alive with my nephews and niece. That's what happens when the font's too small. She had a right way to do things. She had her own way of doing things, a trait which I also may have inherited from her as well. She was well known for her wonderful cooking. German potato salad. Every person I asked when I was writing this up, I said, what kind of food did Grandma make? First thing they said out of their mouth, German potato salad. Some of you probably remember it. She was really good at sweet and sour cabbage. She would make pies, cookies, tons of other baked goods for just some of her specialties. She was kind, caring, funny, passionate, and driven. And she never slowed down until she had a heart attack at the age of 88. Before that, she would run circles around my own mother. My mother, who has 3 kids, she would get home from running all 3 of us around all day to find Grandma Peschke in the backyard doing some gardening. She would babysit my youngest sister, Jackie, when Katie, myself, and my mother were at bell practice every Wednesday night. She also was not great at whispering, especially in church. And unfortunately, I'm not allowed to tell you any of those stories, but that was one thing that stood out about her as well. She taught me how to play cribbage. I still play with my mother to this day. And we would play catchphrase. As my generation got older, you all know the game where you pass around the little device and you try to get people to guess the word that's on the little screen. Every single time she would get the device, she would ask, what button? We say, bottom button, Grandma. Always the bottom button. She'd try to stump us. Instead of getting us to guess the word on the screen, she'd let the time run out. And she'd say, ha ha, it was giant clam, I got you guys. She was loved and cherished by all who met her. Those of you who remember her, remember the avid churchgoer, the German cooking, and the sense of humor. She lived until she was 92 years old. She passed away in June of 2008. She was buried back in Mead, Michigan, in Mead Cemetery with the rest of her family. Now, Mead Cemetery just happens to be on the corner of the lot that used to be her farm. So she is now back at home, buried in her backyard. We thank you, we miss you, and we love you, Grandma. We still have your pew covered.
Our grandmother Priester. My grandmother, Florence Priester, born December 15, 1902, was my father's mother. She married my grandfather on Wednesday, March 21st, 1923, and they had 2 sons, Earl and Robert, who each had 2 children of their own. My grandmother lived in Orchard Park, New York. Our grandmother Priester was a wonderful combination of warmth and kindness, laughter and love.
Our grandma, my grandma Priester, loved her family. After we left Buffalo, she would come for regular week-long visits to Michigan. Grandma would travel by train, plane, or the Greyhound bus. In those days, we were able to greet her and her smiling face as soon as she made her way off, whatever way she preferred method of transportation was for that trip. The experience of picking her up was so much fun. We would be waiting right at the gate for the plane or outside of the beautiful Detroit train station as the Amtrak train pulled in. Having Grandma visit was always a great joy. One of my favorite memories from one of her visits is of her joining me and my friends to play jump rope outside.
Our grandmother. My grandmother Priester had a contagious laugh. There were many visits back to New York, just like her visits to Michigan, and no matter how long we were in town, for we would always have dinner at her house. Grandmother loved to set a beautiful table of crystal and china, along with silver servings and eating utensils, and of course, cloth napkins that matched the tablecloth were a must. But there's one time in particular that reminds me of her contagious laugh. My cousins and I were at grandmother's house, and we had recorded her laughing. We played it over and over again for her, and I remember her just sitting there and laughing with us. The rest of the night, she would cover her mouth each time she saw us.
Our grandmother, my grandma Priester, was a remarkable woman. She had lost my grandfather, who passed away at age 60, which I think is a very young age since I too am in my 60s. Grandma carried on with taking care of her home, which she loved. Grandma especially took pride in the interior of her home. Her pride didn't stop with special china, matching cloth napkins, or her gorgeous silver that made an appearance during our visit. She would also change the bedding, curtains, from winter to summer. There would be flowery spreads and white tied-back ruffle sheers on the windows for summer, and during the winter, there would be thick drapes that matched gorgeous comforters.
Our grandmother. My grandmother Priester, even though there were multiple states between us, we always felt, excuse me, we had such a connection to all that was going on in her life. Grandma Priester and my mom would write letters back and forth, as this was the means of communication then. Along with the letters, we had a joy of hearing endless family stories from Phil Grow, whose family ironically grew up streets away from ours. What a treat to have our own personal family historian move to the same town we did to help keep Grandma's memory alive.
Our grandmother, my grandma Priester. We had a wonderful grandmother, one who never really grew old. Her smile was made of sunshine and her heart was solid gold. Her eyes were as bright as shining stars, and in her cheeks fair roses you see. We had a wonderful grandmother, and that's the way it will always be.
will you come and sit a while with me? You raise me up so I can stand on the mountain. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on the mountain. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. Oh, I am strong when I am on your shoulders. Raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up to more than I can be.
Wow, this singing and all these messages, I got a pretty hard act to follow. I'll do my best. Hey, we have tacos and ice cream, so please come on down for that after the service. I just want to take a few minutes this morning and tell you a little story about two women, Lucy and Ruth. Now, to me, they were always Nana and Grandma. But Lucy and Ruth, I'll tell you a little story about them. Lucy was my dad's mother, my Grandma Davis, and she was the third of 5 children. She was born in 1917, a little town about 25 miles west of Boston, a little country town in those days with apple orchards, and now it's a suburb, you know, with subdivisions and all that, but it was a little town back in those days. She was the third of 5 children. Her mother My great-grandmother, Mary Ellen Tobin, came to America in 1900. She came to America in 1900 with her sister Nora. They got on a boat in Cork, Ireland, and took a boat across. I think Nora was 18, and my great-grandmother was, 17. And they came to America and lived their life. And my great-grandmother, Mary Ellen, married a guy, my great-grandfather from New Hampshire, and they had 5 children, my grandmother being the third of the 5. And in 1935, my great-grandmother, who had, she came to America at a time when the Irish were coming. She did not come during the time of the famine, which is when a lot of people came to New York and Boston in the 1850s, right before our Civil War. She came to America in 1900, around the turn of that century, and she was a seamstress. So she had a skill which enabled her to work for a fairly well-to-do New England family that owned a shoe factory. There's a lot of shoe manufacturing there at that time. So she had a skill, and she didn't live in the Irish ghetto in South Boston. She went out and she became an American, because she came to America to become an American at the age of 17. A young girl going all the way across the sea. And so in 1935, my great-grandmother died. And my grandmother would have been 17 or 18 when she lost her mother in the midst of the Depression. It's also the year that my grandmother married my grandfather. And then they went on to have 7 children. My father was the 5th of 7. They were twins. My aunt, whom I'm still in contact with the ones who were left, my aunt, who was the 4th, my dad was the 5th. But my grandmother was a strong woman, an independent woman, worked at a time when lots of women did not work outside the home, and she took care of her family, always working and always taking care of her family, and she worked as a waitress and did a number of different things. And she had her ups and downs and struggles in life. In 1968, 2 of her sons were in Vietnam. My father was in Hue, and involved there during the Tet Offensive, and my uncle Mickey. All the kids got regular names, but they got nicknames. This is a side note. So my dad's youngest brother is Eugene, named after my grandfather, Eugene Jr. So he went by Mickey. And then my aunt was Marion, but she went by Trudy. My father was Russell, but he went by Tommy, which is an Irish thing, and sometimes by Dave. See, it's a whole story. I won't get into the family dynamic. But they all had nicknames that they went by. My grandmother kept them all straight. She had 7 kids, and then she wound up having 21 grandchildren. I'm the 14th. But she lived a long and a strong and a proud life and took care of a family. It was a matriarch of our family, all at about 4'10". On a good day, we said 5 foot. Just like I say 5'9", really 5'8". My mother's mother, Ruth was the 8th of 9 children. 8th of 9 children. And she came from an old New England family that was English and Scottish, a lot of Scotch-Irish. Before the Scotch-Irish were the people from Northern England and Scotland. A lot of them went to Ulster. Give you a little bit of history this morning. A lot of people who are called Scotch-Irish went to the Ulster plantations in what is now the north of Ireland, and then they came to America and wound up in Pennsylvania, they wound up in Kentucky, wound up in West Virginia, they wound up west of the mountains. But before those folks wound up over there, where a lot of my cousins are, before they went there, a lot of those Scottish people wound up in Worcester, Massachusetts, and then up in New Hampshire. And Ruth was descended from a lot of Scotch-Irish people who had fought against Cromwell in the 1650s. I found this a bunch of ancestors fought against Cromwell in the 1650s, and then they wound up with a one-way ticket to Massachusetts. And when they got to Massachusetts, the English didn't like the Scottish so much, so they sent them a little bit west. So they were Presbyterian on that side, and then later on Congregational and Baptist, and all those good Reformed Puritan type groups. So that was Ruth's family. Being the 8th of 9 children, that was her heritage. She was also a strong, independent woman. Neither of my grandmothers were the warm, hugging, baking cookies type. They were the working in the 1930s, taking care of their families, and say a little bit of salty language here and there, but I loved them. They were strong and they were independent. They gave me and they were very strong matriarchs in their family. They gave me a very good example of things to do. But suffice it to say, with one side that was largely Scotch-Irish and very Protestant, the other side that was very Catholic. My great-grandmother came from a little town called Macroom, which is now Cork County, just as a side note. You got to realize Cork County in Massachusetts is kind of like Waldenburg here. All the people came from Waldenburg in Germany. Everybody in Massachusetts has some relative who came out of Cork County in the south of Ireland. It's very, very common. My great-grandmother came from a little town called Macroom, which is about 10 or 15 miles outside of Cork City in the south of Ireland. And Macroom was where William Penn went before he got the land grant to establish what we now call Pennsylvania. Very interesting kind of little side note there. But suffice it to say, with one side that was largely very Irish and Gaelic-speaking and Catholic, and the other side that was very Scotch-Irish and from the north of England, I look at the movie Belfast from two sides. But I learned from both of these women how to be strong and how to be independent. And they were women who had vulnerabilities like anybody else, and they had their trials and their struggles in life, but they always taught the importance of family and the importance of hard work and how to have a thick skin, but also go through life with a sense of humor, which interestingly enough in my line of work has been proved to be very, very helpful. So I thank those women. I thank those women, my Nana and my grandmother, for that. Also this day I want to give thanks for so many other women who have come into my own life or the life of my family. I thank my friend Erica, my son's mother, who does a wonderful job with our son. I thank my lovely wife Jennifer, who is a wonderful stepmother and so kind and brings us on a lot of crazy adventures. And I thank her for all of her kindness and all the value and love that she brings into our son's life. And I thank her for that. And I thank my mother. Hi, Mom. I'll call you later tonight. The gift is on its way. I'll call you later tonight. Thanks so much of my mom. And I think of all the other women. I think of my father's sister. My aunt, my father's twin sister, who now lives way up in the country in New Hampshire on the Vermont state line. She lives with her granddaughter, and she sends a message to me almost every day on Facebook, wishing me and Jennifer and Ian well. And she's such a kind and strong woman. She's had a lot of challenges in her life, but she always has persevered, and carried on. And I think of people like Clara Mulready, who was my 6th grade teacher, who taught me the finer points of the English language. I think of Claire Mulready many, many times. We had a common heritage out of Ireland. And I think of Jan Sleeper in the Methodist Church when I was 10 years old and gave me a Bible. You never know what kind of seed you might be planting someday. I think of all of these people and so many other women that I think of. But to sum up with Lucy and with Ruth, Lucy comes from a word which means light, and to witness to light and to see light. And Ruth, from the Bible, was a Moabite. You remember that Ruth's first husband died, and she stayed with her mother-in-law, Naomi, and Naomi said, no, go back to your own people, the Moabites, because you're not an Israelite. You can marry again and so forth and have children. But she stayed with her mother-in-law, Naomi. And then Ruth eventually would marry Boaz and have a son, Obed, and then her grandson was Jesse, and her great-grandson was King David. So Ruth, this foreign woman, would be the mother of King David, and of course Jesus is descended from the Davidic line, the Messiah. So I think of Ruth, this woman who was faithful and strong, and I think of Lucy, who was about bearing light and witnessing to light. And I thank God for my Nana and for my grandmother and all the strength and love that they showed, and how they did this in difficult times as well as good times, and how they blessed their families and through all seasons of their lives. And so I think of those two women, and I think of the women in our lives who teach us the lessons that a woman can really pretty much make their own decisions just about everything, but it's good to have support. Good to have support from the men in their lives and from others in their lives. So I think of that too. And so I give thanks today for Lucy and for Ruth, for my Nana and my grandmother. Love you both.
Good morning. Oh, down there? Yes. Now I think you'll hear me better.
And see you better.
Melissa Maxfield Kilburn, born August 11th, 1881. When she was born, her mother died in childbirth. Her father took the older children and migrated to Oregon, and she was left behind to be raised by an aunt whose own children were already grown and moved away. She attended the Bullock School, a one-room country school, and when she graduated 8th grade, the school board wanted to hire her to be the teacher of that school. However, she was unable to do so because she was needed at home to take care of her aunt, who was not well. I attended that same school during my 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. Melissa was a very spirited girl. Neighbors standing outside might see a cloud of dust coming down the road and say, "Oh, that's just Missy Maxfield. She always runs that horse too hard." In her early years, I heard she loved a party. Take the furniture out of the front room so they could dance. I do remember my father calling square dances. Because she cared for her aunt for so many years, her oldest cousin gave her an acre of land with a house, a barn, a chicken coop, and an outdoor toilet. It was located on Gerald Road, halfway between Yale and Brown City in St. Clair County. She and my grandfather lived in that same house all of their lives. Together, they had 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. On December 25th, 1931, I was born in that same house with my grandmother attending my mother while the doctor took a nap on a daybed in her sitting room, waiting for me to come into this world so he could get home in time for Christmas dinner. She often served as a midwife to 4 families who could not afford a doctor. I can remember her saying, "There are always folks who are more poor than you are." During my early childhood, I spent many weekends at her home. She would sit me on her lap and sing ballads. Sometimes we walked to visit friends. In season, we picked wild strawberries growing in the ditches alongside the road, or gathered mushrooms in the woods. So many other activities, too many to mention here. Throughout her lifetime, she wrote letters to her family in Oregon. I loved reading the letters she received from them. They were like short stories. When I was in high school, every Saturday I drove the 7 miles from Yale to her house to bring her into town to do her grocery shopping for the week. You didn't have a store you could go into like I can any time I feel like it. When I went away to college, I saw her less often. Recently, I mentioned her name to my son Mark. He said, "Oh, I remember Grandma Kilburn. She lived in a ramshackle house out in the country, and I'd love to go there to visit."
Now, friends, just want to remind you before we say the Lord's Prayer together, we, of course, pray for so many people in our congregation and our community and our world, praying for the people of the Ukraine, praying for people who are suffering there. praying for our public safety officers, people who are in service, police officers, firefighters. Remember those in hospitals and nursing homes. Remember today in prayer a good friend, Dr. Bray, who's lost his dad. His dad died here a few days ago. So remember Dr. Bray, and remember his family, his brother Al, and stepmother Mary, and all the family down in Ohio. We lift them up in our prayers. Our love and our thoughts are with the Bray family. I met Dr. Bray's dad a couple times. He was such a wonderful, distinguished gentleman, and I hadn't seen him in a number of years, but he was a strong and a good and a kind man, and took very good care of his family and raised 2 fine sons. And so we thank him for that, and we lift him up today in prayer. But we're going to have the Lord's Prayer, and we get another piece. I want to thank Sylvia for coming today. Thank you, Sylvia, so much for lending such beautiful talent on the harp. So thank you so much for that. And a blessing again, thank you for Marge, and thank you for the tech team, thank you to Lori and Amy, and a blessing to all of our mothers and our grandmothers, and our stepmothers and aunts, and all the different women who in different ways and different times in our lives have blessed us, yes, have blessed us in our families, and have just brought so much. I could go on and on, but we got tacos and ice cream, so I'm not going to. But I mean, there's so many people who have blessed us over the years, and so we think of them today, and we give thanks to them. And talk to the women in your lives. Talk to the women in your lives and just give them thanks for who they are and the blessings that they bring to us as human beings. For our families, for our country, for our world, we thank you. Thank you so much. Let us pray now as the Lord Jesus taught us, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.